Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to session 2, stream 3 at Cloud for Summit 2021. We have two fantastic presentations coming up over the next hour, and I cannot wait to get started. Before we begin, can I suggest that all viewers expand their viewing window to full screen to enhance your experience? Throughout our presentations, you, the audience, will have the opportunity to pose questions to our speakers. To do so, please use the chat window to the right-hand side of your screen, and I'll relay these in our Q&A sessions. Our first speaker of session 2 needs no introduction. I'll do so anyway. Sarah Lean is a senior cloud advocate at Microsoft and the founder of the Glasgow Azure user group. Our blogs have become an important source of learning and inspiration for so many people across Scotland and further afield, and we're delighted that she's agreed to join us today. Sarah will be talking to us about integrating cloud into your IT environment. It's a topic that every organisation is thinking about, and understanding the various ways to do that is key to picking the right one. Let's join Sarah at looking at one of those integration options. Sarah, over to you.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you for that. Appreciate it. As Ben said, we're going to be talking about hybrid cloud, and we're going to be trying to understand what that means, why you might want to do it, and how to think about it going forward. Now, hybrid cloud is something that we are seeing a lot of organisations move towards. I think Gartner did this study and it said that 90% of organisations are actually dependent on a hybrid infrastructure. So I want to talk about what that really means and why these organisations are moving towards it. Now, as Ben said, I am a senior cloud advocate at Microsoft, and I founded the Glasgow Azure user group about 3 or 4 years ago. But I've been in the IT industry for well over 14 years, and I'm firmly in that IT pro camp, that sysadmin, or whatever you might want to call it. I am that traditional server hugger. So that's where I've been for the last few years in my career, and I've been transitioning towards the cloud. So this is a subject that I love talking about and I'm quite passionate about. Now, as Ben said, there is a question box on your screen, so please do fill that in, ask me some questions, and we'll get to them at the end of the presentation. Now, hybrid cloud is a phrase that we hear all the time. We hear people talk about it. They talk about it as a solution, as a cloud deployment method. They talk about it as an answer to your IT problem. They also talk about it as a middle ground, potentially, to your cloud migration. So we really want to dive into understanding what this is and where it actually fits into your IT solutions. Now, in terms of what Gartner say, I think every big cloud provider and also Gartner have a definition for hybrid cloud. And their definition at Gartner is that hybrid cloud computing refers to policy-based and coordinated service provisioning, use and management across a mixture of internal and external cloud services. To be honest, that sounds quite good, but I like to simplify that even more. And I just say that it's a strategy. It's a strategy that allows businesses and organizations to address their technical needs while using the best of both worlds. So using that public cloud and that private cloud that they already have and making the best of both of those. Now, every hybrid cloud model is different and it will evolve to best fit the organisation's needs. And I think that's something that you should bear in mind as well, because there is no one-size-fits-all hybrid cloud methodology or deployment that you can actually take. There's no cookie cutter solution that you can take and then just put it into your organisation. Hybrid cloud is going to be different for every organisation depending on their size, their needs, the applications that they have involved, and their motivations for actually choosing that as a strategy for their IT implementations. But the concept, helps you be more productive, hopefully, and allows you to be more flexible. And, that's really why we're going to explore more into why that is something that you want to think about. Thinking about your IT strategy is something that a lot of people are doing, and trying to understand the different models. As Ben said when he was introducing me, there are different things that you can think about when you're actually looking at your IT solution. You can look at going down the route of just staying in your private cloud data center, or staying on-prem, as I call it. Or you could look at hybrid, or you could look at multi-cloud approach where you're using the best of everything that is out there. But for me, hybrid cloud is all about, like I said at the start, it's about making the best of the use cases and the technology that you already have. In terms of your private cloud solution or your on-prem data center, there's reasons that you want to keep some of that. There are reasons that make that a great thing to still stay within your IT strategy. You know, over the years, you have probably invested tons of money, tons of time into building a data center. So I've got a picture here of a really tidy data center. I don't think I've ever been in a data center that tiny, but we all can wish. But you'll have invested a lot of time and effort into actually making that data center look how you want, behave like you want, in the location that you want. It could actually be in the building that your company owns. Lots of organizations have their server room in the basement of the building that the rest of their staff sit in, or we used to sit in. And that investment is something that you're keen to still look at and still keep having in your organisation. You know, there's no point throwing thousands of pounds of money at something and then ditching it just because something new and shiny has come along. And that's the same for your staff knowledge. The staff that you have in your IT department have built that knowledge over time. They know the systems intimately. They know the bits of application that you have. They probably know every wire and every nook and cranny within your data center. And trying to retain that knowledge is quite key, because we see a lot of organizations struggle when, you know, people move companies and knowledge is left with them. The knowledge walks out the door with them. So trying to keep that staff knowledge and keep all of that and have that investment, that training that you have put into your staff still be utilised is something that is driving a lot of organisations to still lean towards having their on-prem data centre as part of their IT strategy. Now, lastly, compliance is something that you have to think about as well. There are some organisations that need to store or retain their data in a certain location for that compliance or regulatory needs. You know, they have to pass some kind of audit every year, and they have to be able to, you know, say where their data is. And for some organisations, they're maybe not ready. For some industries, they're maybe not ready for all of that data to go into the public cloud, into a location that they maybe can't go and visit, they can't physically touch, and is maybe shared with other organisations and industries as well. So it's being able to have that data in a location where you can physically go and see, where you can control, where you could maybe walk that auditor down when they come into your organisation for that audit, gives organisations a lot of control and a lot of, you know, less sleepless nights for the IT department, because they know exactly where that data is. But conversely, the public cloud offers a lot of flexibility and a lot of benefits. You know, in terms of flexibility, we can spin up resources really quickly. A great example is I ordered a server for my home to have a little home lab to try and play with some of the solutions and look at hybrid cloud and stuff like that. I ordered that and it was supposed to be a 3-week lead time. I've now been told that that server is not coming until October now. So my project is delayed quite massively because of the hardware constraints that we have right now in the IT industry. With the public cloud, we don't necessarily have that. We might have had that at the start of the pandemic when everybody was working to the cloud and using lots of resources. But right now, if I went into, say, the Azure portal, I could spin up a virtual machine and have a server there within a few minutes. So no longer do I have to wait until October to get that server. I could have that quite quickly. And that allows a lot of organizations to rapidly innovate or manage some of the capacity needs that they might have for their organization, and being able to spin up something really, really fast and quickly. In terms of costing as well, I actually think public cloud simplifies the costing. I think when it was Kylie's talk I watched this morning, where she was talking about cloud sprawl and how costs are actually quite hard to look at when you're in your on-prem data center. It can be quite hard because a lot of the costs for your on-prem data center are hidden. You know, it could be hidden within the electricity of the organization because you as an IT person don't pay that bill, so you never think about it, you never look at it. Whereas when you look at the cloud, you can see, you get that monthly bill, you even get a daily bill where you can have a look and you can understand how much your services are actually costing you instantly. So it simplifies the cost and it helps you answer some of those questions that your bosses might have, your finance department might have, and you can be quite on the ball in terms of controlling your IT budget. It also allows you to be a bit more innovative. You know, you can use a lot of the services and a lot of the features that you have in the cloud, some of the newer things like serverless functions and things like that quite easily within the cloud. You can start to play with them, you can start to test them, and you can start to see if they are something that you might want to invest in. You can leverage all of that goodness. I've seen a lot of companies use the data management or data analytics type services that we have in the cloud, because it allows them to have access to this new technology that can allow them to do analytics data without making massive investments in their own data center. Now, I think we at Microsoft have kind of blown that out the water slightly by an announcement that we made at Build, where we can use a combination of Azure Arc to bring some of the serverless technologies that we have in the cloud and be able to run them on-prem. So it's nice to see that some of these features and functionalities that a lot of people are moving towards the cloud are also being available to you in your on-prem environment. Now, in terms of hybrid cloud, we have to think about how you want to pick it, how you want to actually look at going down that route. Lots of people say that, yes, it is something that they want to do, but they make that decision before they actually understand what hybrid cloud is, or even understanding some of the cloud providers' services and the functionality that they have available to them. So when you are evaluating how you want to move forward with your IT strategy, what you want to do over the next 18 months, the next 5 years, there are some things you have to think about. In terms of cloud providers, there are the three big ones, Microsoft Azure, Amazon's AWS, and Google's GCP, and there are obviously a few other ones there, but when you're looking at picking a cloud provider or picking multiple cloud providers, I think there's a few things that you have to think about. You have to ask yourself how each of them actually work. So in terms of cloud provider and trying to pick them, you should have a look at the cost. You should understand how that is actually going to be billed to you and what you have in terms of a budget and what you want to look at and how you can be more optimized in terms of, you know, running your infrastructure in these cloud environments. You know, I know at Microsoft we have a lot of licensing kind of benefits where you can take the license investments you might have made in terms of Windows Server on your on-prem environment and then use those licenses actually in the cloud as well to try and save you some money. So that's things to compare. You don't get those offers with AWS and GCP. So it might be something that you have to think about, you know, do some comparisons around how much it's going to cost and how much you're actually going to think about what you're doing with these services. In terms of services, you should understand what each cloud provider actually gives you and what you can use and how to use all of these services. Again, I think when you look at the three big ones, they offer the same types of services. Their names are all slightly different and maybe their price points are slightly different, but they should be offering the same services. So understand what you as an organization want from your cloud provider. Are you just going to be running servers, or are you going to be running servers and potentially looking at some of the serverless things, or do you want to do machine learning? Understand the capabilities of these cloud providers and where they'll fit in your future solutions as well. Looking at things like service level agreements is also something that I think a lot of customers forget to do when they're actually evaluating their cloud provider. It is something that you need to think about because these cloud providers are actually providing you a service. And if something goes wrong, there is really not a lot you can do in terms of bringing that back up. If your own on-premise data center goes down, the chances are that you can actually do something. You know, you can go and try and redivert power. You can put on your generator. You could maybe start to, you know, take the water out by getting a bucket and emptying your data center if something happens. You can actually physically do something and try and be involved in the process of bringing that back up. If services are going down and you don't have a disaster recovery plan, and your services are actually impacted, you know, you have an outage, you can't provide that retail website to your external customers, what is your cloud provider actually going to give you back in terms of, you know, monetary value? Are they going to return the money that you would have spent on those services? Are they going to help you? How long do they guarantee uptimes? All of these things are something that you should have a look at and understand where that sits. Lots of organizations want all of their services providing the 5 nines, so 99.999% uptime. So make sure you actually look at that. Don't assume that every cloud provider and every service that a cloud provider actually provides you has that level of uptime guaranteed for you. So look into all of the detail around this. Now, in terms of locality, it is something you should think about, especially if you are a geographically spread organisation. One challenge we often have in IT departments is providing a good service to our end users who are spread across the globe. I've worked for tons of companies where the base has actually been in Scotland, so the data centre has been in Scotland, but they have had end users based in, say, America, or Asia. And these people actually have to dial back in the day. They had to, connect with a VPN client all the way back to Scotland to actually access the services. And they slated the IT department because the latency was rubbish, because it was coming halfway across the globe to actually access the services. With the cloud, you can start to deploy services closer to your end users. So make sure the cloud provider you're picking actually has a data center close to where your end users are. I don't think it's massively an issue nowadays. I think when you look at some of the big providers, they are covering the majority of the globe, if not all of it. But it is something to bear in mind. If you're trying to improve something or provide a better service to your end users, make sure you're not assuming that there's a region in, say, Asia that is covered by AWS or Azure. Make sure you actually dial into the detail and understand how that data center operates, and where that is in terms of your end users as well. And lastly, understand the security that that data center provider or cloud provider actually offers you, where their responsibility lies and where your responsibility lies, because there is a shared responsibility model from your cloud providers and yourself. And you have to share that. Often your cloud provider does the physical security for you. So they offer fancy, I think one of our data centers in Dublin is reported to have, tank proof. So if someone tried to get into the data center with a tank, they wouldn't be able to, because we've put in defenses against that. Those kind of things are your cloud provider's responsibility, but where does your responsibility lie, and how can they aid you? What security features do they have to try and make it your life a lot better when you're putting your data and your applications into their cloud? Now, once you've picked your cloud provider or cloud providers, you have to start to think about how to design your environment. And this can be quite complex and quite scary for a lot of organizations, because there's a lot of questions, a lot of decision points that could impact the service, could impact how they actually implement something. One of the key ones is understanding where you put your services and solutions. Should they be going in the cloud provider's data center, or they should be going in your own private cloud data center? And this is something that a lot of organizations struggle with, understanding the pain points and understanding how they should pick this. For me, it's all about understanding your environment, understanding the needs of each of your applications. So doing that deep dive discovery about how each of your applications work, what they need in terms of support, and how they actually benefit your end users. So this is the time where an IT department will actually have to go and speak to their end users and maybe speak to these people and understand how they use this application that you store currently in your on-prem data center. Ask them, does it perform? Do they want something else? Understanding all of what this application that you have in your IT department actually operates. And then you can start to understand if it is something that needs to stay on-prem, needs to stay in your own private data center, because maybe there's compliance needs around that application, so you have to secure it in your own data center. Or maybe your end users that are saying that the latency isn't great because they are halfway across the world and they're not anywhere near the data center. So maybe it is an ideal candidate then to take that and move it to somewhere else into the cloud provider's data center. You also have to understand, like I said, from the regulatory and compliance needs, and even your security standards as well. Like I said, you can't walk into a cloud provider's data center quite easily and understand where your data is. You can't point to it in a rack. You can't physically go and touch it. You can't see that data center. So you have to understand how you secure that and get into that mindset of being able to understand that and being able to deal with how you answer these regulatory with these compliance needs and your security needs as well, because that's going to be a big one. I think, unfortunately, nowadays there isn't a day goes by where we don't see data breaches happening in some kind of solution. So you need to be on top of this, and you need to understand where your responsibility is and where your cloud provider's responsibility is as well. From a point of view in terms of day-to-day management, you need to understand how things change and what that means for your staff carrying out their day-to-day tasks, how they need supported what resources or tools or processes you need to change or put into place for them to be able to actually look after these environments, because you now have basically 2 environments across the board. It does often lead to some management overhead for people, but if you understand how that is, you can start to build in the processes and understand what makes your staff's life more productive and, again, more positive as well. So understand how moving your solutions to the cloud actually changes people's jobs, and give them the security that they need to be able to operate effectively for their job. From an overall operations point of view, you do have to understand how things work now that you're going to be separating or putting additional resources into another cloud provider's data center. Things like identity. So how do you secure things? How do you get access to these operations or applications within the cloud? Are you going to do things like single sign-on so that there's only one password? Do you have to extend your Active Directory? Do you have to look at, say, something like Azure Active Directory to secure it? How are you going to manage that identity for your end users? Also, connectivity. How do you actually access these resources that are going to be in the cloud? Are you extending your network? Are you putting in something like ExpressRoute, so there's a permanent connection between your data center and your cloud providers? Are you using site-to-site VPN? Do you have to change your IP addresses? Do you have to have, firewalls in place? How does that change your networking design? There's lots of things that you have to think about in terms of the operations and extending your environment into this cloud provider's data center as well. You also have to think about the other things like backup and disaster recovery. How are you going to handle that? Is that your responsibility, or is it the cloud provider's responsibility as well? So there's these kind of operations things that you need to think about. And lastly, how do you keep up to date? How do you keep your staff up to date in terms of their skill set, and also being able to understand the new releases that are happening, the new things that are being announced, and how they can either be used in your environment, or if you're saying we're not going to use them in our environment, understand how you can support your staff and stay on top of the innovation that the cloud is providing you with. Now, as I said, introducing an additional environment into your IT organisation can actually add a bit of complexity in terms of management, and can often head you in the direction of actually having cloud sprawl. And this is something that I saw Kylie talk about this morning, and if you haven't seen that session, definitely dive into it, because she covered some really important points. For me, to actually avoid having that uncontrolled environment, having that cloud sprawl, you need to think about having a management handle on what's going on with your environments. Understanding where your services should reside. So understanding the decision points about where you put a service. Do you put it in the cloud? Do you put it in the cloud, in your private cloud data center? Where is that decision point happening, and who makes that decision point? Is there a decision tree somewhere that, people go through the various different answers and it decides for them? Or is there just a catalogue of services and people pick them? Whatever that may be, you have to have that clear understanding about where things go. You also have an understanding of, making sure that you're not duplicating your resources. So make sure that you're not having one deployment method for your public cloud, one deployment method for your private cloud. Make sure that you have standards for both environments. So that's from things like naming conventions, making sure that they are in tune with each other, depending on the environments. And also, like the security protocols, make sure that you don't have different standards for different clouds so that people get confused when they're deploying services. Try and look at understanding how you can simplify the deployment and avoid this duplication, so that there's one rule, and there's one rule for both clouds ultimately. I did say that hybrid cloud and cloud can actually help you simplify your costs, but be mindful of looking after your costs. This is something that can spiral out of control if you forget to maybe shut off a test server, or you maybe forget to delete storage from a virtual machine that you've maybe used, and it's left there, and the costs will just spiral out of control. Or accidentally, someone has used a very large service that costs thousands of dollars a day. I think we've all done that, maybe by mistake, in the cloud. So make sure that you have the standards, that have the guardrails in place to make sure that cloud sprawl isn't happening. The governance that you put in place for avoiding cloud sprawl shouldn't be stopping people from doing their jobs, though. It should be about innovating. It should be about giving them those guardrails so that they are safe in the decisions that they're making and the deployments that they're also making. And lastly, have periodic reviews about what your solution looks like. Are things working? Do we need to change decision points? What isn't working within your environment? Constantly review, iterate and learn as you grow with this new strategy that you've introduced into your cloud. Now, lastly, I just want to give you some pointers for some resources. If you're going to look at Microsoft Azure for your hybrid cloud provider, we have the Cloud Adoption Framework that helps you understand how to cover off some of the things that you might have to do. So definitely have a look at it. There's a link on screen that takes you to the documentation that talks in more depth about what I've just discussed as well. So to summarise, hybrid, in summary, is about modernisation, it's about flexibility, it's about you using the best of both worlds. It's not always right for everybody though. So again, sit down as an organisation, understand where you want to be as a business and what you have in your organisation, and then decide if it's the right one for you. If you do decide that you're going down the hybrid route, look at making sure your staff are ready to move into the cloud and they are comfortable with operating in the cloud, and that you have good guardrails and management processes in place to make this much better for you as an IT organisation. Thank you so much for your time today. There are a bunch of resources that I talked about, or you can explore more about the themes that I've talked about on screen. So go to aka.ms/cloud-first-resources. You can find more information about hybrid. You can find my contact details. But yeah, thank you so much for today. Hopefully there's some questions. Ben, do we have some questions from the audience?
We do have a few. Thank you so much for that, Sarah. I'll kick off with the first question that's coming from Ross. He said, how big an impact is the cybersecurity landscape having on cloud adoption? You mentioned in your presentation the frequency of data breaches. I think many businesses are still at the stage where they're getting cold feet with regards to that cloud adoption.
I'm not sure. I think actually the cybersecurity question is actually helping people go into the cloud, to be honest, especially when you look at what Microsoft are doing in terms of the security. Some of the features, some of the products we have actually make security really easy for you. It helps you with the guidance. You know, a lot of organizations do have dedicated InfoSec teams that can answer all of these security questions. That's their day job. That's what they do. That's their speciality. So they might be slightly different. But for organizations that don't have a dedicated security department, things like the Azure Security Center, I sound like a marketeer or a seller here, but those kind of products within Azure help you. Even me, I'm not a security expert, but if I look at what Azure Security Center is telling me about my environment, I quite quickly see the vulnerabilities. I quite quickly see the actions that I need to take to make my environment much more secure. So I think that's helping drive a lot of people towards the cloud, because there's products and features that can help them meet those compliance needs and also patch up some of those holes that they might actually have currently in their on-prem environments.
Yeah, and you mentioned businesses at the start of their cloud journey, checking with each kind of service provider in terms of a cost perspective. Do you think there's a tendency for some of them to jump the gun and dive into the solution that they think is maybe, again, I don't say on paper, because obviously when they read that paper, it's maybe slightly different. But do you think there's a lot that jump into it without doing their research and homework first?
I think so. I've seen a lot of companies do that. They've maybe picked one cloud provider because they've maybe attended a conference, saw some cool features or someone implementing something, and then they go, I must use that. And they run off and do that, and they implement one wee project over here in this cloud provider. And then when they actually start to think about their cloud solution, they realize that this cloud provider doesn't fit all the boxes, doesn't tick all the boxes for them. And then they end up in a state of multi-cloud because they've got this one project over here, they've got their on-prem data center where they still have to keep some things, and then they've got the actual cloud provider that they've picked through a procurement process or an evaluation process. And then suddenly they're like, oh no, this isn't good. Like, how do I manage this? And they have to start to migrate not only from an on-prem point of view, but then you have to put in another cloud provider and decouple all of that. And it suddenly becomes a big challenge for them and quite scary. So that's why I always say, yes, I'm definitely one of these people that loves to click the buy now button, right, Ross? When I see something shiny that I want, I'm clicking the buy now. But I've learned to go and do my research, go and, look at the review videos on YouTube or read blog posts. And I think that's the exact same for cloud. You need to do your research before you hit that buy now button, because you're ultimately locking yourself in potentially for quite a lot of money and quite a lot of years. So definitely don't pick the wrong solution. So yeah.
Perfect. And from your personal perspective, how would you determine the best location for applications?
I think it's evaluation. I think it's, like I said during the presentation, it's talking to people and understanding that application. Lots of people will say, my IT department is really documented. I know everything. I don't need to talk to anybody. I can make the decision. But I think it takes you. I don't think that's right, to be honest, Ben. I think you need to take that step back. You need to look at what your application looks like. Is it spread across several servers? How much like storage speed does it need? What's your IOPS you're needing? What's the latency? How are your end users actually using this? Do they hate it? Do they wish that you could change it? Is this a time to change it? Or like I said, are they using an application and they're over one side of the world and your data center's here and they have a horrible experience and they hate you and they hate the application? These can help drive the decision makers, and that's where it's going to be different for every IT department, every organization, because they're going to have different motivations to put that application somewhere. For some, it will still be on-prem, it'll be status quo. For others, because of the pain points that they've maybe found during the discovery, it will be the cloud to try and address some of those pain points. So for everybody, it's going to be different, but it's that discovery, it's that research.
Yeah, and as you say, kind of that ongoing knowledge development is absolutely crucial to this. It's not a simple case of adopting it and that's that. I mean, you obviously, as mentioned, your vlogs are a valuable source of information for a lot of people. From your perspective, what's the best way of someone making sure that they've got the right skills to use the cloud, and how do they continually develop themselves?
I think it's a change in mindset. So when I started my career, I would often get pushed out to courses for 5 days, sitting in some room with a bunch of other people. I would then sit an exam on the Friday, and that would be me. I'd be skilled up for the next 5 years because the software never changed, the applications never changed. It doesn't happen like that anymore. You need to be constantly learning, whether that's you dedicate an hour a week to learn about something, or you look on Twitter, or you look at somebody's YouTube videos like weekly to keep up to date with just bits and pieces of news. Then you have to do that. And I think employers need to recognise that they have to invest that time as well. They need to be supportive of giving people test environments or access to, a subscription within Azure or AWS where people can just go and play. They can go and deploy things. They can break things. They have a limit maybe on how much they can spend every month. These are things that both employees have to kind of invest in. They have to invest in their continuous learning, and also employers have to change their mindset and how they support their staff if you're looking at cloud as a solution.
Fantastic. Sarah, I absolutely loved that presentation. I hope things with your home project with the server go well. Counting down the days until October. For anyone who maybe joined us mid-session, a reminder that the session will be on demand post-event for 7 days. And again, a reminder for everyone to reach out to Sarah, to give her definitely give her a follow on her socials. Fantastic source of information. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Ben.
Thanks. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are about to move on to our second presentation of the day. Our second presentation comes from Accutech. Accutech are with us today alongside their partner, Managed Security Solutions. Delighted to have them here. Accutech are a global leader in Microsoft technology. Accutech build highly advanced cloud, on-prem and hybrid services that ultimately deliver on their business benefits first approach. And joining us now, we have Terry Story and Philip Moss from Accutech. Good morning to you, gentlemen.
Good morning, Ben. Thank you so much for having us.
No problem at all. We're delighted to have you here. Terry and Philip are going to be talking us through the question of what is a cloud-first strategy with hybrid cloud. Again, if you want to ask any questions to Terry and Phil, please use the chat facility on the right-hand side of your screen. You can also speak with Accutech at their booth in the virtual exhibition hall, where they're also offering the chance to win a free cloud readiness assessment. Without further ado, gentlemen, over to you.
Thank you so much. And Ben, first things first, do we have my screen sharing clearly?
We absolutely do.
Perfect, good. So my name is Philip Moss. I'm Chief Product Officer here at Accutech, and I'm joined by my good friend and colleague here, Terry Story, who is Chief Cloud Officer at Accutech. And we're going to spend some time today talking about what is a cloud-first strategy, and what does that really mean for your organization, and what does it mean for your ongoing IT strategy, especially when using a cloud-first strategy in terms of the broad and powerful Microsoft suite of capabilities. So what does cloud-first really mean? I think of this in three ways. Putting the correct thing in the correct place. In other words, cloud is not about let's go and run everything in Azure or AWS or Google Cloud. It's about recognizing that there are certain workloads that are the correct thing to run in the public cloud, say email services or collaboration platforms. But there are other workloads that are logical to run closer to where our user base are, say a latency intensive database or something where monolithic requirements or legacy capabilities mean it's better running, close to home in an on-prem scenario. So it's about putting your workloads that meet your business needs in the correct location. But it's also about having flexibility. It's about being able to move workloads around easily. It's about to be able to move a workload that might be running on-prem into another location and back again, based on, say, growth requirements or scaling requirements for, say, a particular point in your financial year where more workload is coming in. And last, it's about management and control. It's about looking after your IT estate and your infrastructure in a unified way so we can work with single panes of glass or unified management experiences. We're not heading off to use an internal system for our on-prem management and then heading off to a public cloud portal to look after our public cloud systems. And I really think about those as being the three pillars or the three core parts of a cloud-first strategy. Correct location, flexibility, unified management. Now, the important thing about cloud is it's not a location. It really is about a mindset, and it's about sort of thinking about our IT strategy in a fundamentally different way. And again, Accutech has been a service provider now for over 25 years, and when we think about building solutions to our customers and with our partners, we think about it in the following terms. We all talk about the new normal post-COVID, so let's think about the new IT platform normal. It's about moving over to an OPEX-based model rather than a CAPEX-based model. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the traditional model of buy hardware, run it for 3, 5, 7 years, spend lots of money on consultants, spend lots of money on software, rinse and repeat at some point in the future. It's about moving over to a consumption-based model and critically thinking of our IT platform in terms of services. So not monolithic platforms, but services that empower our business. And we do that by taking advantage of automation and orchestration to make consumption and implementation of those services easier and simpler. And of course, that drives agility and flexibility, both in terms of deployment location, but also speed of deployment. And it's also about taking advantage of these inherent capabilities we have, both with our modern on-prem systems or edge scenarios, as many of us think about them now, and our public cloud. Take advantage of elastic scale and flexibility. And as I said before, take advantage of that unified management to ultimately create systems that are connected by design. Many of us think about our IT platforms historically as being islands of resource or islands of capability. And this is really about moving forwards to a world where IT platforms are fundamentally connected and integrated end-to-end by design. Now, let's think about that in a little bit more detail, because everyone likes to run around these terms like private cloud, public cloud, hybrid cloud. Let's put some meat on that bone. When I think about these three areas, I think about it as follows. Private cloud or on-prem scenarios is really about giving you infrastructure geographically close to where your users are and dedicated to your organization. So we think of that as being our on-prem IT platforms. When we think about hybrid cloud, we're thinking about services that interconnect between those on-prem or those private cloud experiences and the public cloud. So I think about this as being services that take dependency of the on-prem that might be managed or integrated with public cloud. Backup is a great example. Disaster recovery would be another good example. But over in the public cloud, we have those services that take no dependency on any local resources. So we have something like, say, email or a data lake solution or infrastructure service. right? And ultimately, the public cloud's about consuming service and capabilities on platforms that will be used by other customers. In other words, they are public cloud offerings. And when we think about it in this way, it helps us to understand what is the correct platform to run our workloads for our business. Because ultimately, all of us are building IT platforms to serve our organization. We're not building IT platforms for the benefit of our own technical enjoyment, although I'm sure many of us on this call really love the technical engineering activity. I know I do. So I've spoken conceptually so far. Now let's think about this in the way Microsoft thinks about this story. And I'm going to start with a product that has an odd name, and it's known as Azure Stack HCI. Azure Stack HCI is Microsoft's new breed of edge or on-prem hybrid connected operating system. It is a hyper-converged infrastructure solution, and here's the real power of it. It runs on a range of deployment scenarios. So this isn't an appliance. This isn't some locked out solution. It's based on technologies historically in Windows Server, but this is now available as a new generation of platform. But critically, you can use it to deploy on small edge devices or deploy it to larger branch offices, say 4 or 6 nodes, or even scale the data center with many, many, many clusters connected together, potentially hundreds of nodes using technological cluster sets. And here's the real value here. That is a platform using technologies you already know. PowerShell, you could manage it via System Center. You can actually manage it using many common tools you know from Windows historically. And it works across a wide range of hardware platforms and a wide variety of deployment scenarios. So one investment in technology, multiple capabilities. And remember, there's a large number of hardware vendors and a large number of form factors that are fully supported by this platform. And then, of course, we have Microsoft Azure, the public cloud offering many of us know. But remember, Azure is actually a platform to deliver a really rich set of services. Everything from, say, disaster recovery or backup I've spoken about earlier, through to databases, knowledge management, Bitcoin mining, for example, and similar services. There's a very, very, very wide set of capabilities available on Azure. And the critical thing about the Azure Stack HCI product is it directly integrates with Azure. And notice those arrows are bidirectional. This isn't about simply moving connectivity up into Azure. This is a true bidirectional or hybrid relationship between these fantastic on-prem capabilities or private cloud capabilities and the public cloud Azure. And picking up on this point I opened this session up with, we think about that unified management, and using a set of technologies, broadly speaking, known as Azure Arc, you can now manage both your public cloud and your on-prem or private cloud experiences directly from this unified management experience. And that includes everything from virtual machines through to databases, through to things like containerization, etc., etc. So there's a very broad set of capabilities. But here's where things get really, really interesting. Yes, that's right. As part of Microsoft's emerging hybrid ecosystem, you can also manage resources inside the third-party clouds. I know AWS and Google Cloud is a good example here, but using the power of Azure Arc and some of the technologies that my colleague Terry is going to talk about later on, you can manage infrastructure and resources inside of these public cloud platforms, including virtual machines and databases, and you can control them from within inside your Azure or your unified Microsoft experience. So that's really powerful because we now finally have a core platform that allows us to work across clouds and across different types of on-prem scenario, all from one integrated platform. And here's the other thing I think is really important. Obviously, this one platform is perfectly happy with workloads. Many years ago, I'm sure many of us know that Microsoft was, oh yes, only works Windows and nothing else. Windows, Linux containers, both Windows or Linux containers, are utterly supported by every part of that platform I articulated before. And in fact, Microsoft absolutely considers Linux to be a first-class citizen within its wider portfolio. And I think that's really important because many of us are running heterogeneous platforms. Many of us are running scenarios that have various types of hypervisor or various types of application on various core operating systems. And again, all of those can be run and critically can be managed from this integrated hybrid platform I was articulating for Microsoft. Now, I've given some conceptual stuff. now let's think about actually what's driving some of the drive towards this cloud-first strategy. So unsurprisingly, there's been a global pandemic I think we've all been aware of recently, and at some point it might end, but we're all getting there, I'm sure. But obviously that's driven a drive to remote working and closing of buildings. That's driven organizations to really need a unified management experience. That's driven organizations to need to consolidate and modernize so that their IT estates can work seamlessly between their on-prem and their public cloud infrastructures. And also it's driven organizations to want to change the way they think about their IT platforms. By, instead of, say, having a rack of servers in the corner of a building, it's about now moving to storing their infrastructure in dedicated co-location facilities, or building in high availability and disaster recovery intrinsic in its design. I remember, if I go back, 20, 25 years in this industry, we would talk about, a few organizations would have disaster recovery as part of their planning, large banks or similar public sector institutions. They would do things like, they would reserve buildings and have the ability to go to another building in the event of a disaster, and they would copy tapes and things like that. Well, that was 25 years ago. Today, all organizations intrinsically want to think about highly available distributed systems by design, and critically, the cost point that is attractive. Now, I've set the scene. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to pass over to Terry, who's now going to kind of put some more detail on the way the Microsoft value proposition adds into this, and also talk about some of the customer success stories who have taken advantage of this core strategy and have seen value and benefit. So, Terry, over to you, sir.
Thanks, Phil. Can you hear me okay?
We can. All yours.
Thanks, Phil. If we take all aspects covered so far and we frame these through a lens of a customer decision tree, as an example, then we can really start to make sense of all the pieces of the cloud jigsaw and journey opportunities. Now, in its basic form, public cloud is made up of software-defined compute, storage, and networking with many wider services. And on-premise, this typically translates to a HCI platform as also software-defined, leveraging very similar software-defined compute, storage, networking, software capabilities. These things combined, you can, on-premise ensure high levels of mobility and compatibility with HCI, or providing platform modernization and software hardware consolidation. Now, in terms of this slide you're seeing in front of us, we're really articulating the different kind of cost performance choices out there. Now, you'll see that we mentioned Azure Stack HCI, we mentioned VMware and Nutanix as the three kind of leading HCI platforms out there today. And Azure Stack HCI, being a product in its own right, is kind of the new kind of HCI, platform out there. It's in its third iteration, but this is a new product in its own right. And really kind of, when you have a customer with a cloud first and Azure directional type outcome, Azure Stack HCI is deriving kind of that kind of hybrid kind of outcome solution. There's a lot of reasons for that. Now, typically in the past, a lot of customers have chosen Hyper-V for cost and performance reasons. But today, this all changes as we bring hybrid cloud services to on-premise through Azure.
Terry, we've lost your audio.
Earlier, and bringing slide disappeared. Okay, it's back again. And now with that,
Terry, so sorry, we lost you for about 15 seconds. You might want to repeat.
Okay. So with Azure Stack HCI and Azure Arc for HCI, we bring Azure on premises. So this really changes the game from a Hyper-V being a cost performance benefit and price point benefit into a true Azure on-premise capable solution, providing the ability to run Azure services, your applications, and projecting your on-premise virtual machine resources into the cloud and manage through a common Azure control plane. So if you press the next key, please, Phil. Now, so in terms of Azure Stack HCI and its Azure capabilities, this now opens up to providing from Azure complete management in terms of VM self-service, multi-site monitoring, and actually now delivering Azure services on-premise through Azure Kubernetes services on HCI, which is another set of services we will talk in a future presentation. But essentially, bringing Azure services on-premise in a simplified manner, and in a consistent manner, by only knowing and understanding the Azure capabilities, the Azure portal. Next slide, please, Phil. So Azure for Azure Stack HCI, what does this really mean? It means now with Azure Stack HCI, you get Azure hybrid capabilities as a native service on-premise. This is a highly available, secure service. And what I mean by highly available, it's a clustered service. It can't be interfered with or tampered with. It's built into the solution. So when you install Azure Stack HCI, you register this to Azure, and this enables you then to project the host services and virtual machine resources into Azure and to manage from the Azure portal. So really kind of bring in this modern Azure capabilities out of the box. And so with that in place, you are able then to deploy virtual machines from Azure, to monitor from Azure, to secure, govern, inventory all your resources in Azure. So essentially, providing that single tool set, that control plane in Azure to your on-premise services. And why is this really important? It means that customers can actually modernize and move to Azure capabilities and cloud capabilities with a cloud-first strategy by providing orchestration and automation, but running virtual machines on-premise in a familiar way, providing cloud in terms of control, cost control, cloud at the customer's speed, and at their pace, and in a familiar way, but also enabling cloud services in a granular fashion. Because what we're doing, we're providing a resource bridge between Azure in public cloud and Azure on-premise, connecting those resource providers together to enable that consistent set of services. So the key message is here, you're able to bring Azure services to on-premise and provide a hybrid cloud solution, but maintain without having to refactor applications to uplift and do any real kind of major changes to your infrastructure. You don't have to modernize to move to cloud. You can actually move to cloud on-premise in a very simple and easy way. Next slide, please, Phil. So customer example. So in terms of this customer example, it's further education. Next slide, please, Phil. So in terms of this customer that we're going to be focused on, which is a further education, we focused a lot on refreshing and modernizing their platform, consolidating their SAN architectures into a HCI platform, obtaining 2 to 3 times performance improvements. We were able to get a lot more density from the outcome of modernizing to an HCI platform, while improving security posture and actually enabling cloud on-premise, all to boot out of this whole end-to-end solution approach. Next slide, please, Phil. So in terms of further education, this customer was a cloud-first strategy customer, directionally going to Azure. And we looked at their 40 virtual machines, Linux and Windows virtual machines, and what it will take to modernize, refactor them, and prepare them to move to Azure. And we found that, with Azure Stack HCI, we were able to consolidate their existing 5 servers, which were 5 years of age, and to with latest modern processors and this latest HCI platform, to consolidate down to 2 servers from 5. And from the power, cooling, and rack savings, we were able to pay for the solution under a year, which was a major saving and optimization for the customer. But also, we were able to run all their VM workloads, Linux and Windows workloads, on a 2-node system rather than a 5-node system. And with this Azure native service built in, we're able to enable Azure orchestration, automation, security, inventory, and governance from Azure, and outreach that to on-premise, providing a cloud-first outcome without having to wait months or years to modernize applications or refactor those applications. We just were able to run the virtual machines as they were. It was a migration from the existing platform, three-tier architecture, to the new HCI. And we were able then to, in a granular way, switch on Azure-capable services on-premise and pay for those services in a granular fashion, bringing cloud to the customer in a familiar way and in a granular way. We've given them better cost control. And that really worked out well for the customer. And the last point I want to make on this slide is that this particular customer, we landed on an Azure Enterprise Agreement because this enabled them to have a 15% egress cost savings in Azure alongside the typical hybrid use rights and reserve rights in Azure, to give them the very optimal Azure and Azure on-premise cost savings around the end-to-end licensing model. Next slide, please, Phil. So in terms of the solution we landed with the 2-node Azure Stack HCI, or all-flash system. And this allowed us to migrate the existing 40 Linux and Windows VMs to the infrastructure. And with a 2-node solution, provide N+2, the ability to suffer a node failing and a disk failing on the solution and the system to be able to continue to run. This was an important aspect to maintain running those virtual machines on premise, to provide increased performance, increased resiliency, to give a cloud on premise outcome, to deliver on that cloud first strategy, and to enable cloud at the customer's pace in a granular fashion based on the capabilities they want to enable in the time frame they want to enable, and pay for what they needed for when they needed to align with the business. And this really all in allowed us to provide a cost optimized solution for them that really allowed them to deliver cloud first strategy in a quicker time to value than if they were trying to refactor, modernize applications, containerize applications, and try to move to cloud. So over to you, Phil. I think that's the next slide is yours.
It is. Thank you so much indeed. Right. Thank you, Terry. So what Terry's just discussed there is actually the tangible benefits of embracing a cloud-first strategy, about working with that client and actually using the power of integrated on-prem and public cloud. And also notice he was highlighting there that physical cost was driven down by physically requiring less hardware, and again gaining that integrated experience to public cloud. Now, I'm going to finish this session off by kind of drilling into some more details. So we spoke about this earlier. I described it here as on-prem rather than private cloud, but this capability of delivering on-prem, hybrid, and public cloud integrated services. And of course, this is where Accutech really specialize. And we really, specialize in working with our partners and our customers to deliver this integrated IT platform experience. And I know this slide is a bit of a eye exam, but what you're really seeing here is, think of these as being turnkey business ready experiences, where working with the Accutech team, we can empower your organization. I'm going to work on the left hand side. Some of those on-prem services you see here, or the private cloud services, this integrated Kubernetes managed experience to allow you to drive containers, both Windows and Linux containers. The ability to easily set up complex replicated or DR scenarios, using Azure Arc, this hybrid connected service, to either look after servers either running on-prem or in third-party clouds, and also using Azure Arc to look after data running on-prem. If you move over to the middle, again, we've got those classic ones: offsite backup, hybrid access to files, and disaster recovery. And over on the right-hand side, again, you'll recognize some really big-ticket items. They're kind of popular today, given we're in the middle of a pandemic still. Remote access to desktops and applications, turnkey Office 365, infrastructure services. And at the bottom, adding in those capabilities are really important for us as part of our IT platforms, delivering multi-tenancy, tracking, auditing, compliance, billing, and then for our partners who are working with the CSP platform, integration with that. And you can see here what Accutech does is it's bringing that advanced engineering capability and integrating that with business value to empower your organization. And this likely brings me on to what I call the classic call to action. And as Ben opened this session up earlier, we were talking about a free cloud readiness assessment. This is about, working with you and helping you understand where your workloads are today, recognizing which workloads are best placed to go to which location. If you remember when I opened this session, I talked about it's about a mindset, putting the correct workload in the correct location. It's about working with you to understand how to get your existing operations enabled and working in this new paradigm of integrated hybrid cloud-first world. And it's also helping you understand the cost analysis. What is the most cost-effective solution for organization? You heard Terry talk about that client earlier, where actually they were considering moving these workloads to the public cloud. And actually, after working with Accutech and following an assessment, it was realized embracing this hybrid strategy and using the Azure Stack HCI operating system, it was more cost effective for them to keep those workloads on-prem with this direct hybrid integration. So what I would say is that, please, reach out to us. There's some contact email addresses above. And of course, there's a wonderful website for you to go to. But I'd say during this event today, please come to our stand. You'll see it in the main foyer, and come chat to our team. We have a wonderful set of colleagues, Terry and I do there today, who can chat to you about what I've spoken about in this session today, and also talk to you about those sorts of assessments. So with that, I'm going to say thank you very much indeed. Ben, do we have any questions?
We do have a few questions.
All yours, Ben.
Perfect. Well, first one for me, I love that presentation because I've not come across Azure Stack HCI before. Is it new to market? Is it brand new solution? Or
that's a really good question. So Microsoft crack marketing team, I think, is half the issue here. So as Terry alluded to, the technologies that make up this product called Azure Stack HCI are in fact their third or technically fourth generation of technology. So they're established technologies. What Microsoft has done is they have rebranded and created a new product set. So it's part of the Azure product family. So established technologies in a new commercial delivery model. I think that's the way to really think about it. Yes, really good question.
I was reading last week actually about Windows Server 2022.
Indeed.
In public preview. Are there any benefits to that?
So Server 2022 brings a lot of capabilities, including Azure Arc integration. I think what's important as we think about going forward is that we should think of Azure Stack 8, or let's go back. We should think of Azure, that general term, as the platform, public cloud Azure, Azure Stack HCI. So when we're thinking about infrastructure solutions, either internal or external, we should think about the Azure portfolios of products. And as we go forward, we should think about Windows Server as being the operating system for running those workloads to provide, say, directory services or security capabilities, or to run inside a virtual machine or as a container, right? And as we go forward, we'll see that divide gradually extending, and that's a really important thing. But there are some wonderful capabilities in Server 2022, including, as we've touched on, Arc, security enhancements and manageability improvements. So yes, that's a really good question.
Perfect. No, that's great. It's great. A question that's on my mind when I was listening to that, and it's a conversation that I have fairly frequently. It seems to always crop up. But there'll be a lot of IT leaders out there with masses of legacy applications and thinking, obviously they struggle to upgrade or re-architect them because it's so expensive. What kind of advice would you give to leaders out there when it comes to the legacy application side of things?
I think there's two parts to this, and it really falls into a couple of things. So let's take it from what I call the platform capability one. One of the advantages, first of all, from Azure Stack HCI is it's running Hyper-V, a world-renowned hypervisor. So you have that broad support for a wide range of Linux and Windows OSs. So it becomes a great home for running those older applications. However, as we also know, there are applications that are so old that they're not going to run inside of a modern operating system. And that's where platforms like Drupal or some of the other wrapper technologies, but Drupal is a key one, of course, makes it easier for those organizations to take those legacy applications and package them in a format that then allows them to run on supported operating systems, because we all know anything pre-Server 2008 now is end of life from a Microsoft point of view. So we've got to get those applications running in those modern OSs. So yes, hopefully that answers that question.
Yeah, good coverage there. Two questions I'm going to quickly pose before we wrap up the session. coming from the audience, it looked as though it's proved pretty popular, the talk, but one's asking, are pay-as-you-go licensing models available?
So there's two parts here, and I'll let Terry pick on this. So Azure Stack HCI SKU is a consumption-based licensing model, right? And it's based on the number of physical cores inside the infrastructure, right? Terry, do you want to briefly talk about some of the other pay-as-you-go parts that fit into the wider Arc portfolio and some of the on-prem stuff briefly?
Sure. So if you imagine you've got Azure Stack HCI, Azure Stack HCI is $10 per core per month for the core operating system, so that you get the storage, you get the compute, you get the software-defined networking, and then you have a workload license, and that's typically a Windows 2019 data center license, and you register that to each node in the cluster, and that allows you to give you unlimited VMs within as running workloads within that. That's unlimited containers, unlimited VMs, and so there's two aspects to the licensing model. And then you have Azure Arc. Azure Arc capabilities gives you that resource bridge, that connection for Azure resources on premise, and you can then light up capabilities. So think about when you use Azure Arc to enable Azure services on premise, for the services that you pay in Azure, you would pay the same on top of Azure Arc. Think of it in that way. Okay, so Azure Arc is the bridge. It connects your on-premise to Azure, and then as you enable Azure Monitor, Azure Policy, Azure Patch Management, if you have to pay for the service in Azure, you would pay for the services on-premise.
Thanks, Terry. Good. And probably picking up again on Sarah's point earlier when they were talking about the, obviously the costs and the risk side of things in terms of signing up for certain packages, but are there any risks of commitment of licensing for 3 years or 5 years up front?
So the way to think about this is as follows. Azure Stack HCI and the services, for example, Terry's touched on some of them, say the monitoring service, or let's talk about, say, the Kubernetes service or the database services that we've spoken about. They are all Azure products, and therefore the type of contract and discount models that are available in Azure are available to them. Right, that's the way to think about it. As we move forward, we should stop thinking Windows Server and start think Azure consumption and the Azure world of billing. If that makes sense from that point of view. Yep.
Perfect. Well, listen, thank you so much for being with us, guys. Love that presentation. I'm off to do my my research, having not previously heard about certain elements of your presentation. As a reminder for the audience that anyone that maybe joined us slightly later on, the presentation will be on demand within the next 4 hours for a 7-day period. And again, you can go and speak to the Architect team at their booth in the virtual exhibition hall. Based on, and there's a few more questions coming through to me just now. I'll relay them to you guys offline. But please do go and have a chat with Architect and MSS. But for now, Phil and Terry, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you guys so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. Have a wonderful afternoon, everyone. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.
So that concludes session 2. Please stick around with us, grab a spot of lunch, and we will see everyone for session 3 with some more fantastic presentations coming up in the afternoon. Thanks very much.